in the Western world. I hope you see my PowerPoint.
Yes, you can see.
So whole title for those few units we have today and tomorrow is La crisi nella Chiesa d'Occidente in età moderna. So it is mainly meant the crisis of the late Middle Ages and the Reformation time. And I will start with the first lecture to introduce you into how to understand nowadays the Middle Ages, Medioevo, I think in Italian.
Yes,
Maybe, all right, thank you. So it's maybe about the late Middle Ages, just to give you an image, how could it happen that in the 16th century, the church split up into at least two parts, however we count it, if we say all Protestant churches are one part, or if we say there were many parts in the Protestant churches, then the church even split in more parts in the 16th century. And this did not happen just by case, and it did not happen as a sudden break, but it was prepared somehow in the late Middle Ages. That's what I want to introduce you in the first part. So the model frame of thinking I want to present you is to understand the late Middle Ages as a time of strong cultural polarities, which is a new approach to the late Middle Ages. I start with showing you what was the traditional view about the Middle Ages. There we can say from the beginning on, from the 16th century on, both sides, Catholic side as well as Protestant side, explained Reformation against the background of the medieval world. So the Lutherans mainly, and all other Protestants, would say in the 16th century, the Middle Ages were a dark time. The Middle Ages were especially the time of the Antichrist. For Luther, the papacy was the Antichrist, and in our context among Catholics, I stress I'm only quoting Luther. It's just to understand how he saw the world of his time. He saw himself as the prophet who had to detect the papacy as being the Antichrist. So for the Lutheran part, the late Middle Ages were mainly a bad time against God, and surely from the other side, from the Catholic side, the problem was not in the Middle Ages, but the problem was Luther himself, who had not understood the Middle Ages right. Ironically, the first biographer of Luther was a Catholic who wrote something about biography of Luther with mainly the idea Luther had become a monk in his youth, and he had not understood that as a monk he had the present of the gift of God's grace to fulfill in a monastic life. This was the very traditional life from the 16th traditional view from the 16th century on, and it lasted centuries and centuries still when scholarly understanding of the Reformation began in the 19th century, and it began mainly in the German-speaking world, because the German-speaking world was heavily interested in the Reformation. Even when this scholarly approach began, still Protestant scholars tended to depict the Middle Ages as a bad, mostly in terms of moral, a very bad time. But Catholics, some of them even as German-speaking people working in Rome, Henry Suso de Nifle, for example, or Ludwig Pastor, they wanted to show that the Middle Ages were in a very good state, and Luther had not understood this. This became, in the 20th century, when a Protestant researcher that just Bernd Möller, who just passed away some weeks ago, a Protestant view changed the traditional negative understanding of the late Middle Ages, naming the late Middle Ages even the most devotional period of the history of Christendom that ever had been. And on the other side, Catholic researchers started to say, oh no, the Middle Ages have not been that good as Catholic always had said, but there were many problems just sticking to the papacy of the Renaissance time and the morality of the papacy in this time, sticking on the theory of indulgences. And as strange, surprising, if someone has his micro on, could you mute it? Thank you very much. So this was an effect of the ecumenical movement in the 50s and 60s, that Catholics began understanding there's a reason for Reformation, and the reason was in the Middle Ages. While on the other hand, Protestants tended to say, all right, the people the Reformation worked against, they're not that bad as we always held them. And so, mainly in the Protestant research, which is by quantity the most prevalent area of research on Reformation, this image of Bernd Möller of the most devotional period in the Middle Ages lasted. It is still the dominating one, including the idea that Middle Ages were something like the presupposition of Reformation, which means no Reformation without Middle Ages, but Reformation still being at something different to the Middle Ages, completely by category, and it's mainly the category of theology, the theology of justification, as this dominating school says, what makes a break between Reformation and the Middle Ages. Now, from my side, I want to smooth this dominating theory a little bit by what I called cultural polarities. My idea is to say, no, the Middle Ages are not only a presupposition, a background for the Reformation, but Reformation has its very deep roots in the Middle Ages. That's one approach I have. And the other approach, that's why I speak about polarities, is to have the idea, if you can see the Middle Ages as a complete bad or as a complete good time, and you have reason for both sides, maybe both sides are right somehow. So I can find in the Middle Ages very different of piety, elements of society, elements of theology. That's the idea I'm following now by introducing late medieval polarities. I first show it with this slide as a very very short introduction, and then I will elaborate all three polarities I speak about. Polarity I speak about concerns institutions. Looking on the Middle Ages, you see tendencies for a very heavily centralized church. And on the other side, you see that there are tendencies for polycentric organization of the church. This is the first polarity. Shortly said, the central idea has to do with the Pope, and polycentrica understanding has some degree to do with councils, and to another degree to do with princes, with cities, with national movements like the Hussites in Bohemia. So this is the first polarity, centrality against polycentric understanding of the church, and both came together in the 15th century. I will say a bit more about the other polarities, shortly introducing the second polarity that concerns social history. On the social history of the church in the late Middle Ages, means we see on the one hand important role of the clerics. Still we see it. We see it from the beginning of the Middle Ages, and we still see it in the 15th century. But on the other hand, we see a growing engagement of lay people. In this 15th century, this makes the second polarity, or tangent, you even can say. Sometimes you really have a tangent between those two tendencies. And the third polarity I want to introduce is, for my understanding of Reformation history, the most important one, namely in the history of spirituality. There you have a tendency to outwardness and a tendency to inwardness. Just to use some keywords for this first moment, outwardness has to do with indulgences. I can buy something for my salvation, something for shortening my time in the purgatory, for outwarded piety. On the other hand, 14th and 15th centuries are the time of mystics, of the most intensive mystics. They are the time of devotional literature, looking on the inner status of human beings. So there's a tendency to inwardness, and both comes together. A quantifying spirituality on the one side, and a qualifying looking on the inner human being. So these are the three polarities introduced now, starting the polarity between clerics and lay people. An image like this says a lot about late medieval piety, about late medieval social situation in the church. On the first hand, it is the Mass of St. Gregory, so the very famous story about Pope Gregory the Great, seeing, as you see on the left side above of this image, seeing the Man of Sorrows, the altar, in the moment when he celebrated the Eucharist. This is a legend that grew up more and more in the Middle Ages. It started early in the 10th century with Gregory the Great just seeing a finger of God, of Christ, in the celebration of the Eucharist, and more it grew up, and he saw the whole Man of Sorrows. Obviously, this wants to show that in the Eucharist, Jesus Christ really is present. That's the story, that's the background of the story. But now if you look how it is put into scene on this image, you just see at the limit, at the border, at the frame of this image, Jesus Christ himself. The altar is at the frame of this image. And in the center, you see the Pope, and you see cardinals, bishops, celebrating together in their liturgical clothes. So what you mainly see is there are clerics acting as clerics, and they are the ones who deal with Jesus Christ himself. That's the message of an image like this, showing the clerics are those ones we need to get Jesus Christ present. Those are the ones who speak the words for the Mass, making bread and wine to flesh and blood of Jesus Christ. Someone seeing this image, which was painted around 1500, immediately knew how important clerics are for his or her piety. And this now comes together with a movement even starting as early as in the 11th century, but growing more and more in the late Middle Ages, that asked, all right, if the clerics are so important, if the clerics have a privileged approach to Jesus Christ, says that also true for their way of living. Do they live like I would expect it from someone who is a successor of Jesus Christ? So coming into the concept of successio apostolica, apostolic succession, is it really true that the clerics live like someone following Jesus Christ should live? And this movement, with a very strong anti-cleric approach, would say no, they are not. And this movement became very popular, for example, by Boccaccio with his Decamerone, a book very important in these times because it is written in the times of the plague in Florence, telling us about 10 young people from Florence. As far as I remember, 7 women and 3 men going in the suburbs, in the landscape around Florence, to flee from the plague. And they had the same problem we, at least in the first time of lockdowns, had what to do with all our time sitting at home. They had their special kind of home office, of working at home. And they used the time telling them stories. 10 days, everyone, one story at one day. So 10 stories a day, 10 days long, 100 stories. And the main idea of the stories is to show how evil monks and clerics are. It is mostly joking. It is fun to read those stories, but it is a message very hard against church and clerics and monks and nuns in that time. I took here just an example from one of those stories, telling about a monk who is invited from a couple, husband and his wife, for the dinner. He shows himself very pious. He speaks the prayer, and husband and wife are proud to have a monk with them while they eat. And then after dinner, husband goes up on the roof of the house. Wife remains lonely with the monk, and on the right side of this picture, you see what they then did. They entered the bed, the couple, and so show that the monk does the opposite of what we would expect from a monk. And that's shown in many of those stories. It shows the idea monks and priests are not what they should be. They are not in the state we would expect for someone who is so close to Jesus Christ. A little bit like in our days, it is quite easy to joke about politicians. So if you say politicians are corrupt, I don't think you are right to say this in general to be clear. But if you say this in any context, many people would say yes, they are sure. And so if you study in the 14th or 15th century, priests, clerics, they are just looking for money and sex, many people would have agreed. So there's a strong and a questioning of the status of the clerics. This is one side of this tension, this polarity, very not very constructive side. I come now to a more constructive side. I really can see that many of the lay people not only criticize the clerics, but they ask clerics, educated among them, to teach them in their religion. Lay people wanted to understand their religion. Lay people wanted to participate in religion. Means a kind of spirituality, as we saw in the first image of the Mass of St. Gregory, where lay people only had to show, had to watch, only had to hear words they did not understand. Now we have mainly in the cities, a huge number of lay people who said, we really want to understand what Christianity is. We need a preacher. Here, the pulpit of the Straßburg Münster, where Gerlof Kaisersberg was as a preacher in the late 15th and early 16th century. This is just typical for what happened in the late Middle Ages. In many cities, special positions for preachers were installed, which means those cities you had, as always, in the week, in the morning, and especially on the Sundays, a mass performed by a priest. In the same church, usually at Saturday evenings, you had another kind of worship, which was a kind of just worship of a sermon, a very short liturgy, very, very short, not much more than starting with a psalm of introitus and ending with a blessing, and one or two liturgical chants in between. Mainly this worship served to have a sermon in vernacular. The lay people of the cities came and heard about their belief. So they were not only people to whom the sacraments were presented, but they were people to whom the Word of God was presented. That's what I say as a Lutheran theologian who is committed to a confession that heavily stresses the Word of God in the center of its understanding. This preaching of the Word of God we have in many churches in the late Middle Ages. It is the lay population, is the people that wants those sermons, and they even want to read. Is a legend still among Lutherans in Germany? They say, oh, Martin Luther translated the Bible as the first one into German, starting with 1521-22, the New Testament published in 1522, and then also translating the Old Testament. That's a legend. Sometimes still our learn in elementary school when they have lessons in religion. And this is a legend that is obviously not true. German, which is the area where the printing was invented by Johannes Gutenberg, so the book printing started very early. In the German language, we have 14 translations of the Bible before Luther. Translations in let's say Standard German. There are additionally three translations in the dialect of Northern Germany. But let's say 14 or 17. However, in the printing was invented in the 50s of the 15th century, in 70 years, in 2 generations. About every 5 years, a Bible in vernacular. Always read by just lay people. It was even mainly read by monks who preferred reading in German to Latin. But it was also read by lay people. And so they get an access to the biblical text by these translations. To be honest, the translations are not very good. Indeed, they are made, first of all, they are made on the basis of the Latin translation of the Bible, the Vulgate, and they are translations word by word. So it is, some years ago, introducing this, I mocked it is like using Google Translator, but no, Google Translator is improved. So those translations are really worse than Google Translator. Sometimes you get the feeling even the translator did not understand what he translated. However, it was an attempt to translate, and they were very cautious to have the whole text of the Bible. They even translated the prefaces of Jerome for the Vulgate together with the text to have really the whole Bible, as usually learned clerics would have, now in the hands of lay people. This is also true for the 15th century. So the image you sometimes can even still read in scholarly literature that in the Middle Ages, the clerics hold the Bible for themselves and did not give it to the lay people. Isn't that true? Lay people looked for the Bible, which does not mean that they had the right to decide anything about the Bible. The decision was made by clerics. What was what came to church law by the Bible, but the lay people could read it, and the lay people could think about this for themselves, even in the 15th century. So this has been a view on the first kind of tension. On the one hand, we have this strong position of the clerics. You need a cleric as a Christian in the Middle Ages for all the 7 sacraments, going through your life, starting with baptism, going to the last unction in your life. You need the cleric, even if the cleric is not the one who would form marriage as a sacrament. You need the presence of a priest to have the sacrament of the marriage. Sacraments, especially penance, the Lord's Supper, have to be performed by a priest, and you have to attend them. Since the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, it is clear at least once a year you have to do penance, and you then are allowed to go to Holy Communion. There is nothing without a priest, and the priest is the one who knows about your life by means of penance, because he's the one to whom you have to tell all your faults, all your mistakes, and all your sins. But also the one you can criticize, like Boccaccio did, or he's the one who helps you to think for yourself and to come into a self-organized spiritual life as a layperson. And this self-organizing then leads me to the second polarity I announced, this polarity in spirituality between outwardness and inwardness. obviously, as I introduced, the main point in the outward piety is the question of indulgences, which not always was combined with money. As all of you know, it is quite close from um, from the Lateran University to the, don't know exactly the word, those holy steps. You can go upstairs, the holy stairs, where you can get indulgences for sure without any money, and you could get it without any money in the Middle Ages, but you had to do something, you had to perform something on those staircases. The first very, very important point of an outward piety, that means we need special places and we have to move ourselves somehow. This is a very important example for the German world of pilgrimages, which I showed to you here. It is the Holy Robe in Trier, which was hidden for centuries, and in the late 15th century, it was opened for a pious public. People could come to Trier, and they came in masses, in huge groups to Trier to see this holy robe. It is not easy, is it? In Italy, you have so many possibilities to have saints in Italy, to have tombs of graves, because Italy was a central part of the Roman Empire, which Germany was not. The southern part of Germany was a part of the empire, and Trier, indeed, as the city of Constantine, was an important part of the Roman Empire. But in the north side of the Alps, you don't have many places of remembrance, and you don't have anything origin from the Bible itself. So for the Germans, you had you had to steal the bones of the three kings from Milano to Cologne to have those kings in Germany. And you have a story about Saint Helena bringing the holy robe to Trier. So this was a very important place for piety. This person in the 15th century, you even got a booklet like this that taught you what to do to get whatever you wanted to have as indulgence, to come to a place, to venerate the holy robe, to speak the Paternoster, to pray any other texts. All was written in this book, and this book promised to you how much indulgence you would get for every step you would do. And those books showed a tremendous amount of indulgence for any place in the world. Sure for Rome, sure for Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, there was a special board, a sign in which was written to which place you would have to go to get indulgences. And just going around the old city of Jerusalem, which is not very big, you would get several times total indulgence for all of your life. Doing something. This was very important. You had to do something, had to move, you had to perform a prayer. So you had to show something to the outside of your life. The question, how looks it inside of you, is not completely set aside, but it was not stressed heavily. In theologically reflected texts, it would be said indulgence you can only get if you had right penance, which includes if you really had sorrow about your own sins. But a text like this booklet would not say, look on your penance, look on yourself, look on your sins. But it would say, if you come here, you get what I promised you, which means a shorter time in the purgatory. And as I said to you, this is also true, and it's mainly true for sure for Rome. I don't have to tell you anything about what all is holy in Rome. I would have been so happy to be with you in Rome these days to visit at least some of the places. Maybe I hope later on it will be possible. This book I just want to show you, to show how popular those books about indulgences were, how many people wanted to have them, and you can see this in this book because it shows how quickly books like these were introduced. For my German students, I usually have to explain what is the Pope's sign. All of you see it is a Medici Pope, which means the Pope we speak about is Leo X. It is the book is printed in 1515. So it went the way to Leo X. But if you look on the printed line above sign of the Pope, you see Babst Julius Jahrzehnt. Sometimes I'm joking with my students and ask, oh, in what time really lived Julius X? He never was a pope because we have Julius II and then Leo X. So what you see here, there was a printer who had something on the stock in his print which spoke about Julius II. Then Julius II passed away, and he very quickly put the new number of the new pope, the 10th, into his book, and the sign of the new pope, a Medici, in his print. But he actually forgot to change the name from Julius to Leo. That's what happens if you want to print things very quickly. So you are blessed under Pope Benedict, under Pope Francis XVI, if you do it like this printer. And just to show you how strong the stress, even for the printers, was to make booklets like this. And to say a bit more, what does it mean to have many, many indulgences? In our idea, usually we think indulgence is something you can count with. It says very exactly something about numbers. So that's why I speak about outward piety, or many researchers speak about quantity in this kind of spirituality. That's indeed true. But speaking about numbers does not always mean to calculate with the numbers. That's what I take this example for. It is an epitaph for a nun in the imperial city of Nuremberg. And you have the motive of Gregory's Mass. You see, it is Pope Gregory before the altar. Here, in contrast to the image we had before, the altar is much more in the center of the image. It is really shown Christ is present here. You see, even with Veronica's image at the Man of Sorrows, you see how the Eucharist Day is prepared, and you see the Pope and the Cardinal and the Bishop behind the Pope. And under them, you see a text, which is this one, that says, whoever honors this figure which means the Mass of Saint Gregory, of Pope Gregory. Whoever honors this figure on his knees with one Paternoster and Ave Maria, he will have the very indulgence from the vision revealed to Saint Gregory in Santa Croce in Jerusalem. That means, and now it comes, 30,000 years of indulgence and 20 years of indulgence from each of two popes, and from 43 bishops, 40 days of indulgence for each, and from 30 popes, 200 days of indulgence for each. You calculate with? I didn't think so. It is not easy to follow. You can say it's roughly, it starts with 30 years, then there come 40 years to it by the two popes, and then 1,600 days, which means again roughly 5 years, and then again 6,000 days, which means around 20 years. So it's 30,000 years plus something, and then even more, all these indulgences are confirmed by Pope Clement, and all who will preach this indulgence, they themselves will get 2,000 days of indulgence. So that's a promise for preachers too. The numbers mean, you will see, if you think about what did people in the late Middle Ages think how old the world is. And if you look into chronologies, for example, a chronology of Paul of Burgos, you will see they counted the years about which the Bible speaks, and they come to the effect that the Earth in their days is about 4,000 years old, will last not more than 2,000 years. So people living in this time expect around 2,000 years of the world, which by means of logic means also the purgatory will end in 2,000 years, because when the world ends, Jesus Christ will come back to the last judgment, and all of the world, which means this world, the purgatory, will end. So it is very, very grateful to have 30,000 years. That's 15 times of that you need to stand in the purgatory. Your punishment for the purgatory could not be more than 2,000 years. Here you even get 30,000 years just for Paternoster and an Ave Maria. That's a very good deal. And this very good deal means indulgences are not meant to calculate, not really. They're meant to say God is of overwhelming grace, and he gives you of his grace if you just do a little. And you have to do a little. The concentration is on doing something, which then means performing these prayers here in Nuremberg, going to Trier, going to Rome, going to Jerusalem. Or if you can't go there, to pay the amount of money you would have paid for pilgrimage to Rome or Jerusalem. And this paying of money means then to buy indulgences sold by the preachers traveling around Europe and selling these indulgences. In any case, you have to perform something outward. Against this, attention to this, as the other side of the polarity, you have what I call the inward spirituality. You can see it here. The Man of Sorrows, we saw twice the Man of Sorrows say in those masses of St. Gregory. But both Men of Sorrows we saw special function. They should show how the sacrament works. This image we here see depicted by Lucas Cranach, a Wittenberg painter who later on would be part of the Reformation movement. But here's in 1515 still did not know about Reformation. This image shows what you really have to do with the image of the man of sorrows. You have to think about, why did Jesus Christ suffer? And why did he suffer for me? And this leads you to real penance, not by doing something, but by letting the insight come into you. This is a totally different approach to spirituality, a totally different approach to Jesus Christ. Looking on the inside of the human being and watching Jesus Christ, who came on earth for us and who was brought to the cross for us. Same you can see in an image like this, the love of John. It is just a part of what you all know as victims of the Lord's Supper. Always you see John leaning at the breast of Jesus Christ. Taking this scene out of the Lord's Supper, again, you lose the context of sacramental cases. And you see just a personal encounter between a believer in Jesus Christ, and you know John loves Jesus Christ, but you also know from the Gospel of John, he is the disciple who's the most beloved of Jesus Christ. So it is a love from both sides. It is up to you to follow this love, usually in a mystical way. Again, another image typical for the late Middle Ages, with the same purpose, another kind of identification. Mary, mourning mother, who sees her son dead, takes him on her lap. She's the one who gives us, and mainly the female persons among us, a possibility of identification. We have to deepen ourselves into this grieving mother who knows what it means to lose the own son in such a cruel way. Deepens oneself into the passion, into Mary, and even into Jesus Christ. We can learn by a collection of spiritually leading texts based on some sermons, Johannes von Pals, an Augustinian, held at the court of Saxony in the late 15th century, and he published it at the Kylyfodina, which means something like going under the earth. And these Kylyfodina presented prayers and also presented kind of meditation, introduction to meditation. You see, this long Latin text shows always the same pattern. So I just take the first paragraph of this text. Domine Jesu Christi, regratio tibi de vulneribus dextremanus, quam propter me perforari ficisti, offero tibi omnia bona mea, quam vis sin pauca, in illa manum et unum Pater Noster, et Ave Maria, in amore huius vulneris, pro me suscepti, rogitanso ut concedas mi bona opera facere. Lord Jesus Christ, I thank you for the wounds of your right hand that got those wounds for myself. I bring to you all what is good in me, omnia bona mea, even if this is just a few. I bring it into this hand, together with one Paternoster and one Ave Maria, loving this wound that you got from me, demanding that you would concede to me to make good works. To some extent, the same as we had in the Nuremberg epitaph, in one Paternoster and one Ave Maria. But expectation is not to get indulgences in a huge number, in an incredible number as we had it, but the intention is to become better, to do good works. I do not something, but I get the grace of God to do something. That's the logic of this kind of prayer, which goes through all 5 wounds Jesus Christ got in his crucifixion, and we have the same game with each wound, bringing all what is bad in me into those wounds and getting all what is good from Jesus Christ. This doesn't demand from human beings anything to do except seeing he or her is a sinner. That's the inward piety we can see in the late Middle Ages. And now I come to what is the most crucial part for the understanding of Reformation and the understanding why Reformation would not remain within the Middle Ages, as many reform movements did in the 15th century, but why another kind of church would grow up in the Reformation. So I come to the institutional polarity, a polarity, as I said, between the centric organization of the church and a central understanding of the church, starting with the polycentric understanding. Century is the century of the councils. There's the Council of Constance and the Council of Bell. Constance, starting as a council, had the duty, it had the task to bring the schism of 3 popes to an end, reinstall just one pope, which really where it really succeeded with the election of Pope Martin V. In this council, the schism was ended on a not without difficulty. It was not easy to bring the people who called themselves popes to resign from their position, but at the end, the council succeeded. The idea of the council for thinking about what happens with the church in the 15th century is the interesting thing, because does not get its rights in the way that Jesus Christ himself gather it or something like that, but by means of representation. In the theoretical text about councils in the 15th century, the most used word seems to be representation. The council is a representation of the worldwide Christianity, which 15th century means truly without America, which also just means Europe, Near Eastern part, and Northern Africa. That's the world for the people in the 15th century. But the self-understanding was that's really the world of Christianity we are representing. So the council understood itself at representing Christianity, the power not coming directly from Christ in heaven, but the power coming from the church as the body of the Christ, the body of Christ. If the church is the body of Christ, its representation would speak in the name of Christ. And this representation comes all parts of Christianity, again, mainly from Europe. The other parts who were seen as parts of Christianity in the Near Eastern and in Northern Africa, these were parts under the reign of the Islam. So you just had some titles of bishops of there, or some suppressed bishops. Those who decided, they came from Germany, from France, from Italy, from Spain. These were some from England. They were not so decisive. Mainly the four countries mentioned, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. They made the decision, but they had the understanding we come from all ends of the world together. The church is spread out of the world. That's the main idea. To conflict with another idea of polycentric organization of the church. The very same council that understood itself as a representation of the whole church, and that even said about itself it was supreme to people calling themselves Pope. The very same council condemned Jan Hus, among others, because he had questioned the role of the Pope in the church. Among the sentences condemned in Constance is the sentence that Jan Hus had said, the Pope has not been and is not, or Peter has not been and is not the head of the church. Meaning, from the Pauline background, the head of the church is Jesus Christ himself. The church of Jesus Christ is not identical with the earthly church, but it includes also the heavenly church. So the Pope could never be the head of the church. That's the argument of Jan Hus. But what was condemned was Peter has not been and is not head of the church. There were some other sentences of him, but this was among the condemnation. So the council took power over the Pope, condemned someone questioning the Pope. And it did so to show, even if we are representing the whole church, and even if we are judging about the Pope, do not question the power of the Pope in general. Condemnation, as you see, Jan Hus was burnt in Constance against the promise the emperor had given to his followers in Bohemia. And there with Bohemia, we are at the other point of decentralization in the 15th century, because after the of Jan Hus, Bohemia, to a certain degree, the theology of Jan Hus became the leading theology of the Bohemian people. Their struggle with the king was a person coming from a German background. There was a somehow national struggle, there was a social struggle, it was the lower nobility struggling against the higher nobility, and it was the bourgeoisie struggling against higher nobility in Bohemia in the following decades. With the result in 1475 that there was accepted a second church in Bohemia. The sign for this movement, for the Hussite movement, was the claiming of the cup in the Lord's Supper. They said it is not right that lay people do not get the wine in the Eucharist. This was the symbol of the Hussites, together with the mentioned social movements. at the end, in 1475, after a longer period of civil war and war in Bohemia, the Peace of Kuttenberg said petitions of Bohemia would accept the Church of the Pope, another church not seeing the Pope as their head. And so in 1475, generations before started what we usually call Lutheran Reformation, have the acceptance of a second confession in a very dense territory. This shows how broad the possibilities in the late Middle Ages were. It was not just one church, but it was one church accepting confessional difference even in 1475. It's the situation in France. The King of France, Charles VII, reigned in a time when the mentioned Council of Bale came into conflict with the Pope, and Pope Eugene transferred the council from Bale to Ferrara and Firenze. Some people of the council remained in Bale and promulgated laws that strengthened the power of local churches. Now, Charles VII picked up those conclusions of this Council of Bale to make it national law in France, which meant at the end he installed a church in France which still, in difference to the Hussites in Bohemia, accept the Pope as the head, but by fact would not have any interference of the Pope into the belongings of this church, which mainly meant the election of bishops was mainly performed by the chapters of the cathedrals together with the king, without the Pope. This was another kind of building a church without at least papal power in it, another kind of decentralization. And if you look further to the German area, we see there were many princes who tried to make them free from papal influence, especially in the context of election of bishops. Many of the princes in Germany provided that in cathedrals in their territory, members of the family were elected bishop without any intervention of the Pope. So looking into the European Church in the 15th century, we see many powers far away from Rome, close from Rome, while, on the other hand, surely the idea of a central church was very present to show you just to make me just a bit more suffer that I'm not in Rome, and to show you pictures that you might know very well, even if you won't have the possibility to go every day to the Sixtine Chapel, but you all might know far better than Germans who usually only know, oh, there's God with Adam at the ceiling of the Sixtine Chapel. You might know there's pictures at the side wall of the Sixtine Chapel where you see what centrality means. This is the centrality, the central perspective of Renaissance. What you see in the image, it is the central building. You see something like the Pantheon, even if not exactly depicting it. And you see in this centrality, the keys come down from Jesus Christ to just one of the apostles, Saint Peter. This is what centrality means, and this idea becomes even stronger in the 15th century. After the times of the councils, I just mentioned Pope Eugene transferring the council to make the council more dependent of the Pope, and building the Vatican in this impressive manner as it is built, also meant to show here is the center of the worldwide church. The 15th century is also the time with the last anti-pope, Felix V, coming from the Council of Bale, because papacy strengthened its powers and also had supporters, mainly Juan de la Torquemada, who developed the idea of a pope completely independent of what the church of other gremiums of the church, in the name of Saint Peter. And it is no case that exactly in this time the old Constantine Church of Saint Peter was replaced by what we all nowadays know as Saint Peter in the Vatican. This also showed there the Vatican is the center of the church. We are at St. Peter's tomb, making this Vatican so important as the seat of the Pope. What I wanted to show with these polarities is we will not find a very clear image of the 15th century. We will not have an idea of thus decline, everything getting worse, as traditional Protestant view had said, and as Catholic research mainly says since the 15th century. And we won't see a good, well-ordered, well-shaped medieval times, as for a long time Catholic views said, and now with this idea of the most devotional time, Protestant research somehow would say. It is not good, not bad, it is both of that. And we have powers that go into different ways. That is an explanation for why then in the 16th century those powers could not be held under one roof together, but went those different ways into different confessions. So that's what I wanted to show in this first unit, and I would be very happy to answer all questions you have to me. Thank you for your attention, and please, asking questions, remember it would be very nice to introduce your name and maybe a little bit about your background, that I know where you come from and what you introduce into this lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. I think that we also need the who wants to make a question to open also the video, not only the audio, because it's better to see the person, because only 4 students have the video stream active. But this is good for during the lesson, during the speech, because it helps the connection. But during this little debate, we can open the video. That's no problem.
After that, what
there was an echo for me. Am I right? You are asking for the love of John? What the full meaning? What the full symbolic meaning of this is? Yeah. Thank you very much. It's as very often in the Middle Ages, we have to see some levels of understanding. The first understanding is reminding for the Lord's Supper. That's the first level, very close to the biblical text. The second level is to think about what does it mean really to be at the Lord's table. And this means not only be present, but to be close to Jesus Christ. And this, on a third level, means you are asked to love Jesus Christ as John did, and this includes mainly to be the Son of Mary. So to be at the place somehow at which Jesus Christ was, because at the cross he says to Mary, look, here's John, he's your son, and to John, look, that's Mary, she's your mother. And this is very often reflected in medieval texts. John is somehow the one who comes to the place of Jesus himself in earthly matters, there where it belongs to temporal questions, to our family. And that's what we have to follow. That's the symbolic meaning, and coming close to Jesus Christ so means to live in love in our earthly contexts. And then become very close to him. In some contexts, you also have reflections about John is leaning to the breast of Christ. The breast is the place of the heart. So the best way to come to Jesus Christ is to come to his heart and not to follow him just by your brain. So there are very different perspectives in this image.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. I have a feeling before that Paul Sunny Fernandez, you were thinking about signing up. Am I right? You're muted, so we need your micro.
I am coming from India, in the state of Kerala. We have two parallel tradition of Christianity. Starts with St. Thomas, 2000 years by St. Thomas Apostle.
Yeah.
We have that tradition, and we have the Oriental churches, beautiful community we have, church community. Then also we have the Portuguese tradition of Padruvado. So that means in Kerala and India, have a long back of Christianity tradition. But nowadays, the church also fears that things will happen like in what happened in Europe because of this polarities. The church is more of becoming institutionalized. So in the core, there is concentration of keeping the spirit of Jesus' gospel values, evangelization. So while attending the class, I also very much interested to know about your reply about this kind of churches, that which is also the wind is going even in the Asian countries.
So, but you're asking from this situation, just
Yeah, situation is same now.
Yep.
It is happening.
That might be true, and I even sometimes say I have the feeling even we in Middle Europe, in the Catholic Church, have a similar situation, especially what this tension between clerics and lay people concerns. You might know in Germany we have a strong lay movement at the moment, and there is a huge tension to those who are in the office. So as a church historian, one would be happy to be a prophet, say what will follow in our different countries from this. Sure, it will not be the same as in the 16th century, but we see what I find impressive as a Lutheran theologian is that the Catholic Church still in our days is able to bring very different kinds, different styles of spirituality together as a worldwide present church. But it seems to be at the moment like the late medieval church in a situation where it does not work anymore to bring those differences together. So it's a hard work to become a priest or to be a priest in these days.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have another question. My name is Meinrad Hötzel. I'm a Benedictine monk from the monastery of Einsiedeln in Switzerland. I'm a student of the Gregorian, but I'm attending this lesson as a guest student. And I want to ask, you talked about the Hussite movement and how they are accepted as another confession in the church in their time. For me, it would be very interesting to hear a little bit more about what it means that they had an identity as a own confession. What was their self-identity as a confession, and how we can talk about an acceptance of the Hussites as a own confession. But I think I don't know. I'm not. For me, it isn't so clear what confession in this time could mean in this content. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. It's indeed confession in our usual language is defined by what happened in the 16th century, which means most of the new emerging confessions would define themselves by special confessional writings, which means for the Lutherans, the Confessio Augustana, for the Reformed, the Helvetic Confession, for example, or the Synod of Dordrecht. All this did not happen in Bohemia. They did not define themselves by special confessional writings, but they said, we are those who follow the Bible in the right way. This is quite similar to something what happened in the Reformation in the 16th century. They saw the papal church in the Middle Ages as something that did not follow the Bible in the right way. The definition of confession says somehow was a negative one. And the understanding of the Bible was just defined by a kind of tradition. And what they then, so this is for the second part of your question, what really means confession this time. The first part was even a bit more difficult. What makes the identity of a confession if it is not a confessional text? And this comes from, for the Hussites, from at least three reasons, 3 points. The first one, again, is a negative one. The symbol was having the wine in the Lord's Supper, and so being different to the papal church. The second one was making anew the primitive church. This was very important against the rich church of that time, to be poor like the primitive church was, to share all properties among them. And this could be combined with a third point, a very eschatological one, meaning they understood themselves as the New Jerusalem or the New Holy Land, which can see in the Taborite movement, part of the Hussite movement in the 15th century. Many of you will know that they called some of the hills in Bohemia after the names of the Bible, the most famous one, Tabor. So they are also called the Taborite movement, this part of the Hussite movement. This was inspired by the idea, now in Bohemia, the Holy Land, the promised Holy Land, comes again for the last days of the world. And there was always a tension in the Hussite movement between the more peaceful, just saying we follow the primitive church, and the sometimes more aggressive ones saying we follow the, we are the people representing the New Jerusalem. It came together in something that made their identity, until they were suppressed in the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, namely being a lay church. This was very important for them, that priests did not have much power with them, and priests were elected by the lay people. This was very important for them. And this came into the last reminding rests of the Hussite movement in the 17th and 18th centuries, when they, as the Bohemian Brothers, became part of the Pietist movement in Protestant churches. So that's a try to describe. Interestingly enough, it seems to be very deep in Czech identity to have this Hussite element in them. That can you see if you look at the church nowadays is called Hussite Church, which does not stem from the 15th century, but it is founded in the 19th century as a protest against the Catholic Church. And they picked up the old name of the Hussites, again taking it as a contrasting name against Catholic Church.
Yes. I'm Father George. I'm Father George Makwori from Kenya, currently in Rome. I'd like to appreciate your presentation, while also appreciating that the church, as the body of Christ, has really grown for the past 200 years. And it has won several challenges, but thanks to God, the one who started it is with it. And that's why, despite the many divisions, it is still standing. While we appreciate that there are times that the church has experienced difficulties from the human frailty, the church has remained strong. Jesus began the church as an institution. That's why he chose the 12 disciples. He taught them, otherwise he could have gone teaching randomly. He began the church as an institution, the first Christian community. And the church since then has evolved. It has experienced its own problems because the church is both human and divine. So that's why in the church, at times we have had excommunications, we have had anathemas, we have, like now what you have presented, the time of the Reformation, yet the church is moving on. This is something that we need to appreciate. Now, given that we are living in this time, the recent council that sat appreciated that the church or the body of Christ is wider. And that is why we are even having this discussion that we need to read the times of, we need to read the signs of the time and then act accordingly. Like the spirit of Protestantism that began in the 16th century has continued. Like in the area where I come from in Kenya, the first Lutheran missionaries who came set foot actually in my village. That's where they settled, and that is where they have the headquarters. For a long time, they operated without a bishop. But recently, about 10 years ago, they have, I have heard they have bishops. I don't know whether it is also a time that the Lutherans are beginning to realize that the church, to be strong, needs to develop some structures of checks and balances, given that the church grows.
So, first of all, I thank you very much for this strong confession, for thinking about unity of the church, being all the body of Christ. And now thinking about Lutherans, indeed, Lutherans all over the world are very different regarding their structures. In Germany, sometimes we had very strong structures, but in another way than the Catholic Church. For centuries, the German Lutherans had no bishop in terms of spiritual bishops, but the administrational duties of a bishop were performed by the princes. So the king of Prussia was somehow the bishop of the church in his country, which might sound very strange to Catholic ears, but which made the structure of the Lutheran Church in Germany indeed quite strong. So sometimes when the Lutherans went beyond the borders of Germany and of Scandinavia, Scandinavia is quite similar to Germany in this regard, they became much more weak regarding structure because they had the impression it might be wrong to have too strong structures, say, in the church. And reading the gospel again, like in the Hussite movement, from the primitive church, saying there were very soft structures. So in America, for example, the Lutheran Church is more organized by synods than by bishops. And as I understand from you, also in Kenya, this might be the case. And indeed, if there the Lutherans now learn it can make sense also to have bishops, I think it is really a process of learning from the Catholics and maybe also learning from other Lutheran churches. What in general this shows, the structure of the church in the Lutheran Church is not that much defined as it is, say, in the Catholic Church. In the Catholic Church, you have a clear structure of what a bishop, what a priest, what a deacon would be. In the Lutheran Church, you can have a church without a bishop. You would say there is a pastor, not a priest, because all Christian believers are priests by baptism, meaning they are close to God. And every Lutheran church has to look for itself how it would structure itself. This gives space for learning, as you describe it, from your home country. But it also brings the risk with itself not to be quite clear in the own organization. And one of the efforts of ecumenical dialogue I see is that I, as Lutheran, can learn from the Catholic side to appreciate also what is a clear structure. By the way, I find it very interesting that you from Kenya, as Father Fernandez from India describes, both of you are in situations in your countries which some similarities to what we can see in the time of 15th, 16th centuries. This might be a sign for that it can be useful to look into this historical situation to understand our situation worldwide now.
Yes, actually, we learn from one another and see what we can do regarding the context in which we are living. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Professor?
Yes.
It's like somebody is not asking a question, probably out of curiosity. What do you make of this idea of ecumenism as it stands now?
It is. All of you might have different experiences from your countries. So I speak from the background of my country about ecumenism.
Yes.
And we are a country in which we have two strong, almost equivalent confessions, the Catholic one and the Protestant one, which used to live in different parts of Germany over centuries, but since the 20th centuries, we live mixed up. And we live in a situation, and that's maybe very typical for Europe in contrast to other parts of the world, in which religion in an overall sense is declining. This leads us in Germany to a situation where when I started studying theology 30 years ago, I was in a situation in which more than 90% of the Germans were part of a church and were members of a church. Nowadays, we are close to just 50% in Germany. Many people leaving the church. We also have the reunion of the two parts of Germany. Eastern Germany, under Marxist government, had this decline in the 50s of the last century. But nowadays, church in general, both together, Catholics as Protestants, are on the way to become a minority in our society in Germany. And that, at least, and at last, is the point where I say we as Christians should not speak so much about our differences, but we should speak about what is unifying us. We should more speak about we believe together in Jesus Christ than to speak about we do it in different ways. I know there are many problems on this way, and at the moment in Germany we have a discussion about if or how it could be possible to share the Lord's Supper, to invite, at least as a Catholic priest, Protestants are also to the Lord's Supper. I know there are many problems, but I think to come into our minds to say it is good to know about differences, but it is better to know about the unifying gospel of Jesus Christ. This should be the way into the future. I can imagine that against other backgrounds, this might be also a good way for other parts of the world, but I'm not able to speak about India, Africa, Latin America. I do not know enough about these parts of the world. So in this very global context, as you have in this situation, I just can bring in my Middle European perspective. So should we go into the lunch break now and start again at 3 o'clock?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So thank you very much again, and see you in a bit more than an hour.
Okay, Professor. The same address, and I'll be till 4 o'clock, but after I have to leave. But the connection will be open, and everything will be recorded for the other students.
All right.
Okay. Have a good lunch to everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye. See you.
See you later.